But are you afraid to die, Connor?
You can't kill me, Lieutenant. I'm not alive.
What'll happen if I pull this trigger? Nothing? Oblivion? Android heaven?
I doubt there's a heaven for androids.
Having existential doubts, Connor? Sure you're not going deviant too?
I self-test regularly. I know what I am and what I am not.
This episode of the Sarcastic Happiness Machine is hailing and giving credit to a legendary experience. I'm going to explain why I love this game so much. Detroit Become Human does what Nier Automata fails to do. Pose an Aesop of what does it mean to be human. See, the reason I disliked Nier Automata was because Nier's fanbase thought it was a good evaluation of said message. Instead, I tended to like this game's iteration of the question. Even if the laws of entropy and Darwinism make it impossible for androids to surpass humanity and its programming. It's a game that follows three characters' paths: Connor, Marcus, and Kara. Kara's path evaluates the concept of human love and protection.
Things didn't turn out like that.
Please don't leave me.
There's no other way, Alice. Listen, I want you to go with Rose. She'll give you the life I never could. Here's your passport. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Alice. You made me feel alive. You deserve so much more than I could ever give you. I hope you'll find a real family. And be happy. Without me.
I love you.
Marcus's path evaluates human ideology.
Let's see if you have any talent. Give it a try. Try painting something.
Paint? But would I... Painting what?
Anything you want. Give it a try.
Humans have decided to exterminate us. Our people are packed in camps right now, being destroyed. One that very well may determine the future of our people. Now, if they want war, they'll get it.
And Connor evaluates human conviction and human duty.
Don't shoot! We need it alive!
Never make it to the other side.
I can't take that chance!
Now you will get yourself killed! Do not go after him, Connor! That's an order! Connor! God damn it!
Part of which comes through best boy Hank. I swear that Hank is the stand-in for a majority of the human population. Bitter, jaded, and miserable. There's something I can truly appreciate of Hank's character, as the feelings of crippling loss can inevitably debilitate your ability to appreciate anything, let alone life itself.
I was worried about you, Lieutenant. I came by to see if you're all right. I came to say goodbye, Lieutenant. You should stop looking at that photo, Lieutenant. Nothing can change the past. But you can learn to live again. For yourself. And for Cole.
You know, every time you died and came back, made me think of Cole. Give anything to hold him again. But humans don't come back.
I understand.
Now leave me alone. Go on, complete your mission, since that's all you care about. Get out of here!
Yet instead of a father figure loss like I've had, Hank's is much worse. He lost his son. In fact, solely due to the Connor and Hank dynamic, Connor's route is the most enjoyable. Not to mention that this game has, most likely, the best branching storylines to tell that I've ever experienced in a game. Branching options is an incredibly difficult thing to balance, and Quantic Dream does an impeccable job with it. Ironically enough, as you play as main character Connor, it displays a sense of humanity retroactively, as you find Connor learning the aspect of what makes us all human. What makes us all human can be summarized up in one phrase: interpretation of life. And in this interpretation of each of our lives, we inevitably make our viewpoints known and heard, and the reason why it is this phrase is the inherent need for most people to validate their life experiences through the lens of another's interpretation of their own life. For the most part, this is an inherently immutable rule, and it applies to all backgrounds, ideologies, and emotions of nearly every person, which is honestly a prevailing theme across all routes. As a result, regardless of which outcome you choose, for the most part, you start to think less of whether they're a robot or android or not. In the end, for me, Detroit Become Human is the game that makes me ignore that mental filter. Through masterful characterization, I ended up simplifying my thought process of whether I simply liked or disliked a character. What that should imply to you is that I ended up not caring about their android status and started to be less discriminatory based on previous status. There are many aspects that test these characters and many issues of human history that Detroit Become Human address. All sorts of political issues ranging from quote-unquote white man bad to subtle usages of martial law takeovers, internment camps, to the concept of what really is love, domestic abuse, racism, duty versus humanity, and the list goes on. I also love how the Elizabeth Warren stand-in has a 33% approval rating before the events of Detroit come to pass. That's most likely a somewhat accurate reflection of what her presidency would be like. Albeit credit where credit is due, I really enjoyed the segment of where Marcus is in a junkyard trying to put himself back together. It had an interesting depiction as if Marcus went through the torments of hell or the underworld. It portrayed such a visceral scenario that it completely took me away from the fact that they were androids, despite the graveyard being populated with nothing but androids. There was a rather strange and visceral sense of catharsis when you managed to piece yourself back together with parts from other androids. It was such a wonderful depiction that it felt like you were the one trying to survive. It painted a masterclass of Darwinistic behavior, and I loved every second of it. Albeit down the line, I didn't really care for Marcus's routes, but it had its moments as well. Kara's route was Kara's route. Kara's route was most likely the only game-breaking issue. I don't really want to get into it too much because the game-breaking aspect is filled with spoilers. As such, I won't get into why it's game-breaking, excluding one aspect. When you complete the story for the first time, and you go through it the second, Kara's route is incredibly cheap. What is not incredibly cheap is Hank's development. See, when done correctly, and your friendship with Hank reaches a certain level, Hank himself had gained the most satisfying payoff imaginable. Hank came to his own conclusions, and Hank and Connor's friendship had helped Hank move forward once more. Hank and Connor ending up as friends is the most human aspect of Detroit. Hank is our lens, or at least for most of us. It is our lens to see those who are different under a different light. Story aspects aside, I do have to mention one other great thing, something a bit underrated and underappreciated that most, if not all, reviewers never seem to mention: QTEs and Qs. When you play a game and they tell you to press button to do this action, you don't ever really think of how it is implemented, which isn't your fault, because most of the time we're trained not to care. However, after playing this game to near platinum, then comparing and playing the remake of Final Fantasy VII, I continuously noticed how well designed Detroit's visual cues and QTEs are structured, and my word, it is the best possible game for visual cues. Quantic Dream came up with the idea of your visual cues mostly representing how actual basic movements would be structured in the game. They were absolute mad lads because they wanted to simulate human movements. For example, in Jericho, there are doors where you operate an old wheel to open a door, and they use the visual cues to simulate how you would turn one of these things in real life. Then there's the QTEs, and I swear that the only game that can compete with these cues is Legend of Dragoon. Consider how smooth and slick Detroit implements these QTEs, most notably in battles and fights, is one of the best I've ever seen. In the end, this game was normally a 9.5 out of 10 for me. Sadly, after trying and failing to platinum the game, I had to bump it down to an 8 out of 10, which, to be honest, is still a worthwhile score and experience. I really adore this game, and honestly the thematics it poses, the mechanics it implements, and the social issues we as a society address entirely integrates our own understanding of humanity and allows dissenting views on humanity through various lenses to come together. Something that, to me, Nier Automata fails to pose even at a remote capability. I consider Detroit Become Human to be a modern classic and a legendary piece of fiction, and I suggest that you play this game to find out why. With that, you know the whole outro deal. See you in the next one.